Hi, I'm Josh Rushing, and you're in the stream. Panic about the coronavirus outbreak is fueling a global rise in anti-Asian sentiment. But is COVID-19 really to blame for people's racism? Tell us what you think in our live YouTube chat or on Twitter. Across the world, Chinese people and those of general East Asian descent are reporting a spike in verbal and physical attacks. Let's take a look at some of those incidents. In Italy, which has seen a big outbreak in coronavirus cases this week, there's been violence, abuse, and harassment. One Filipino man was attacked in a market after being mistaken as Chinese. In South Korea, there are now nearly 1,000 confirmed cases. There are more than 500,000 people have signed a petition to ban visitors from China. Now, social media isn't really helping feed the racist narratives. In Japan, there are nearly 200 confirmed coronavirus cases, and the hashtag ChineseDontComeToJapan is trending. Elsewhere in New Zealand, where there are literally 0 confirmed cases of the virus, Chinese Kiwis and Kiwis of Asian descent are still reporting abuse. And here in the U.S., where more than 50 people are confirmed to have the virus, a woman in the New York City subway was attacked for wearing a medical mask. Yeah, here's one reflection from a woman of Thai descent who faced verbal abuse while riding the subway in Los Angeles this month.
These Chinese people are crazy. Dude, they man.
I was really debating and wanted to say something. I wanted to stand up for myself. But on the other hand, I never felt safe enough.
Chinese people are cool, but their hygiene, they have no hygiene. Their hygiene is disgusting, bro.
The moment really shifted the way I think about the larger Asian American community, and this idea that we just have to stand up for each other.
This current climate of distrust is familiar to many Asians who recall the global panic of the SARS epidemic of 2003. People of African descent who face discrimination during Ebola outbreaks can also relate to the scapegoating. But health officials say people's fear of Asians is misguided because viruses, well, they can begin anywhere. Have a listen to World Health Organization's Director General, who recently urged solidarity during these difficult times.
We must be guided by solidarity, not stigma. The greatest enemy we face is not the virus itself. It's the stigma that turns us against each other.
Today, we're continuing our coverage of the coronavirus, picking up where the conversation left off with our community last week. Joining us to discuss is Eva Dou, a foreign correspondent who's joining the Washington Post. Eva's based in Beijing, but speaks to us today from Detroit, Michigan. Also with us is Bruce Y. Lee. Bruce is a medical doctor, a health policy professor at New York University, and a senior contributor for Forbes. And finally, we have Janelle Wong, a professor of Asian American Studies at the University of Maryland and an expert on anti-Asian racism. Hey guys, thanks a lot for being with us in the stream today. I appreciate it. Eva, can you catch us up? We talked about coronavirus last week on the stream, but when we ended the show, we said, well, it looks like this might be the end of the Chinese chapter, and this is about to open up to the worldwide narrative. Can you tell us what's happened in the last week? Where are we today with it?
Yeah. Thanks for having all of us on the show.
Sure.
So I just arrived in Detroit a few hours earlier, flying from Beijing. And so with a lot of other journalists have been under sort of home quarantine for several weeks in Beijing. So the narrative and what the discussion is very different over there and outside of China. Within China, there isn't so much this issue of race because it's more just geographical, that people who are coming from the Hubei province are under very strict quarantine. And then outside of other places, it's looser. I think in other countries, it's a much more complicated and difficult issue because you do have, in a lot of countries, large populations of people who were born in the country but are of Asian descent, and they maybe have never been to China in their lifetime. And so, kind of the conflation of people who have been to a high-risk area with people who just look similar is where a lot of these problems are emerging.
So, yeah, we're looking at this as kind of this global story and this, like, racist response to Asians around the world as this virus spreads. I mean, in fact, the racist response is probably the only thing spreading faster than the virus at this point. But I'm just curious, within China, is there discrimination against people who might be known to be from the Hubei province? Is it a similar issue within the country?
Yes, and it is. I guess the way people think about it in China is quite different in that it's these kind of severe quarantines are mandated by the government, and they've even right now, if you're in Wuhan city, you can't go in or out, and so it's just very different than how in Western countries like the U.S. we think about think about how we manage these kind of situations.
Well, I think we're going to see it pretty soon, to be honest with you. Dr. Lee, can I go to you? I read your article in Forbes about how COVID-19 coronavirus is uncovering anti-Asian racism. It is a deadly serious topic, but you actually approach it with a bit of humor. Your writing style is fantastic. I'm going to tweet this out so our followers can see it. If anyone wants to check out my Twitter, I just sent that out. Don't do it right now, but after the show, read Bruce's article. What's your take on this? How did this first get your attention?
Well, so of course the virus started emerging, and there's a mysterious pneumonia that was emerging late 2019, and then in January, so you started getting news of something's happening in China, and then you started seeing on social media and also just wandering around in the public, you started hearing talk about, it's another virus that's emerging from China. So you started hearing some of those sentiments early on. And of course, around January 20th is when news really got out that there's this new virus that's circulating and potentially can get outside China. And then you really saw a pickup of a lot of these incidents on social media, discussions on social media. You heard casual conversations on the subway or just hearing people talk in the elevator. And then you hear these news about these different incidents where people were actually actively harassed. So it picked up pretty quickly, which suggests that this is a quote unquote pre-existing condition. So this isn't a situation where, suddenly there's a virus and suddenly people change their attitudes and like, maybe I'm going to become, more discriminatory or more of a bigot. It was existing before, and this probably just uncovered some of those sentiments.
How has social media played into this? Because when the last time we had SARS, it was 2003, social media and smartphones weren't then what they are today. So how is it different today?
Yeah, so social media is kind of like a gigantic happy hour or a gigantic high school. So you see the same behaviors, but it's just magnified. So the issue here is that information can travel a lot faster and further with social media. So if you have the same attitudes, you can start seeing those attitudes more clearly, and they can spread too. So the question is it really actually spreading these attitudes, or is it just showing it more clearly? Probably more the latter, because people don't necessarily sit there on social media, and if they're not prejudiced before, they don't say, maybe I should change my views. Although there are people out there who may be unaware of the facts when it comes to coronavirus and see something, and then they can be swayed in that sense. So maybe they don't have the scientific facts and they can be swayed by social media. So I think social media is really like a gigantic megaphone, and it's really emphasizing and magnifying everything.
Janelle, we have a video comment from one of our viewers, someone in the stream community, that talks about the historical roots of anti-Asian racism. Let me play that first, and then we'll come back and chat about it.
What tends to be forgotten in this conversation is a much longer racist history in Western culture of yellow peril narratives that tend to reduce Asians to invasive, infectious, primitive, or ignorant others. And I want to highlight that these are not apolitical fantasies. These are cultural narratives of national difference that presume Asian people are both the origin of or at fault for epidemic disease, rather than thinking about how globalization, in fact, makes us responsible for each other in a global community.
So, Janelle, I know in the U.S. there's a checkered past with anti-Asian racism, particularly in like late 19th century, where they passed some laws around it. Is that true elsewhere? And can you kind of talk about what this virus is bringing out that's so long been there?
Absolutely. So one of the real kind of shameful laws in U.S. history was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which eventually barred all Asians. And one of the rationale for that set of laws was really the idea of Asians as particular disease carriers. I think this is really a potent reminder of the ways in which, and I saw some of your Twitter followers and commentators also made this point, that despite the fact that Asian Americans as a whole and Chinese in particular have demonstrated in recent times higher levels of average income and financial security, this financial security has in no way translated into an immediate or secure sense of belonging. And this particular health scare really illustrates that. I think one of the Twitter followers who commented on this also made this great point that we see anti-Asian racism flaring up now, and it should be a reminder that we do need to stand together, that we as Asian Americans should also be cognizant of the ways in which other groups have suffered specific targeted racism and see that we are all connected.
Well, Janelle, can you talk a little bit about the idea of a model minority, or what a model minority is supposed to be and how it plays into this?
So this is a very common stereotype. It's the idea that Asian Americans have been able to make it in the United States without government assistance and through putting their heads down and studying. And it really ignores U.S. immigration laws, which have hyper-selected Asian Americans who are particularly well educated to come to the United States. But many of us have internalized that idea that Asian Americans don't need to rely on others to find success. And this is, again, a really important reminder that the kind of success that the model minority stereotype concentrates on, that is economic success, does not necessarily translate into full belonging or protect us from racism.
Yeah. I completely agree with Janelle. And I think one thing really fascinating for me coming from living in Beijing is just how different this conversation is in Asia compared to in the US and Western countries. And that in the US, it is this question of belonging and the model minority, that no matter how hard you try, you could be born in this country and are still not accepted as a full-fledged American. But in Asia, it's actually a different conversation right now, in that it's not so much fear of the foreigners and fear of something exotic and far away, but kind of proximity, people knowing very well what neighboring countries are like, and that regional animosity that is really flaring with China. And I think China's economic and political rise is somehow connected to both of that, and that it's bred a lot of like free-floating fear about China and what it's going to do to the rest of the world. And that's a common factor in both Asia and Western countries. And so in East Asia, we've seen that a lot. Also, this kind of these underlying fears of China flaring out into like racism and discrimination against Chinese tourists.
You know, it's always a weird position for me to talk about racism on Al Jazeera English. I am white. I am a male. I am from Texas, former military. Like, it's the least empathetic position to be in terms of identity. Not sympathetic, though. I'm very sympathetic. In my place in these conversations is to listen and learn. But I want to hear from you. What is racist? Like, what for you in America? What are subtle things that maybe people don't know? Is it the stereotype of overeducated or oversuccessful? Or what are some of the things? And we can go to you, Dr. Levi. I see you nodding your head, a Harvard graduate doctor who has like all these successful things in your bio. Tell me, what are like some of the racist things you run into in society here?
Well, one of them is is not distinguishing among different individuals who are Asian. So first is not distinguishing among East Asians in general. So, you know, certainly there are people of Chinese descent, Japanese descent, Korean descent. And also, if you look at China itself, it's an incredibly diverse country. I mean, you have, you know, well over 1 billion people of many different walks of life, many different personalities, et cetera. And then you see over here, in the United States or in Europe and other places like that, many times there can be the tendency to clump everyone as one large homogeneous blob, and that everyone's the same, and that there's not a distinguishing among like how different people look, what their backgrounds are, and what their personalities are. So it's not viewing people as individuals. And I think we're seeing that with this outbreak too, because people are just lumping everyone together. So they're not bothering to distinguish, oh, well, this person may not have been, you know, to Wuhan, China, or this person may not be of such and such descent, or this person was actually born within this country. So this is one, I think, stereotype that's really being magnified and emphasized here. You know, other stereotypes, we alluded to that previously about the model minority, but it's also, you know, a silent minority as well, because you don't hear about as much discussions about anti-Asian racism. You hear about maybe other demographics. There's more and more discussion, which is good. And but I think that discussions about the challenges that Asian Americans and people of Asian descent has lagged, because you don't hear about it in the media. You don't hear about it as much in social media as well. So this is an opportunity to highlight that and really emphasize that it exists and it's a problem.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned social media. I'd like to bring in some comments. This is from our live YouTube chat, which is really hot right now with the comments. From someone named, it looks like Imre Kochak, I think. And it says, I don't think racism, as one would usually define it, it's misinformation and lacks of credible information from the authorities that lead people to being scared. I think the authorities on a global scale need to spread information on how the virus spreads. A lot of people think that an Asian person in the vicinity means instant infection. Janelle, there's a history of that too, right? And that I was talking about the late 19th century in the U.S. Weren't there like fear of disease, or it's kind of wrongly used saying that Chinese people were bringing disease, and so they created a law to stop Chinese people from coming into the U.S.? Is that true?
Exactly. So the 1882 Exclusion Acts were really, okay, sorry,
Oh, we got a technical challenge there. Okay. You're back, and you're back. No, go ahead, Janelle.
So yes, Asian Americans were excluded from coming to the U.S. as immigrants because they were thought to be, this was one aspect, there were others too, they were thought to be carriers of disease at a higher rate than other groups. And I can understand the comment from on the YouTube channel, but I also think that what we see here is very quickly this conflation of non-white, especially Asian bodies, as particular disease carriers. And it is partly ignorance, but I think it is also interesting how quickly people start to conflate the idea of the Asian looking person with disease carrier. That has long been the case in the U.S.
Yeah, you know, this is, again, a deadly serious topic, but we're going to have a bit of fun with it right now with a video that we pulled offline called Coughing While Being Asian. This could be a bit of a superpower here. Check it out. So it could be a bit of a superpower. But Dr. Lee, tell us just give us some basic tips on how to avoid coronavirus, but even more important, how to avoid being racist about the coronavirus.
Yes, so I guess that's an example of making lemonade out of lemons, that video. But so we have to keep in mind that viruses don't sit there and say, okay, I'm going to infect someone based on their appearance. I mean, they're completely non-discriminatory in terms of that. You know, as long as you have a respiratory tract and lungs, then you are potentially at risk for catching the coronavirus. So it's all about respiratory droplets. So if someone who is infectious, they will have the virus potentially in their respiratory droplets. So if they cough or they sneeze and that floats in the air for a little bit, or if that touches any of the surfaces and then you end up touching that surface and then you end up rubbing your eyes or your nose or your mouth, you can potentially transmit the virus to yourself. So again, this has nothing to do about the individual. It happens to be, you know, is the virus there? And then how do you protect against that? Well, number one, of course, you want to stay reasonably distant from people who are sick in general. So if they have the flu, if they have a cold, if they have any type of respiratory illness, you don't want to catch it. So, of course, if someone's coughing, then you want to be a bit careful. You also want to make sure that you wash your hands frequently and thoroughly. And if you look at people washing their hands, there's a large percentage of people who don't really know how to wash their hands. It sounds like an easy thing to do, but what you really should be doing is you should be rubbing your fingers and between your fingers and your nails, and you recite the alphabet. So it should be about 20 seconds. So a good way is just going A, B, C, D, all the way to Z, slowly, of course. And then the last thing is, you know, if someone's sick, don't force them to go to work. Or if you're sick, or if someone else is sick, you don't want them spreading any type of germs or pathogens around the workplace or the school place. So remember, all these things are not specific to coronavirus, and are not, again, not specific to any type of racial background or ethnic background. It's just simple stuff that you should do always. So that's another thing that we need to emphasize, that to get rid of all this panic and fear, what experts are telling you to do is really what you should be doing all the time.
You know, Dr. Lee, this reminds me, yesterday the New York Times sent out an alert saying CDC tells Americans to get ready for the coronavirus. In the entire article, they never said how to get ready. So, like, I'm going into full prepper mode with my family, getting them to the desert, or is it just I need to buy a couple of masks and wash my hands some more? So I'm glad you got that information out. Janelle, I'm wondering, if this disease started in Sweden, would we see a racist response to it?
I think that you know, race is a powerful force across many societies, and Eva did mention it's quite different where you're in a homogenous Asian society, but other kinds of differences, geographic difference, regional differences, start to divide people. And I think it has been heartening to me that many different groups, not just Asian, in the U.S. have taken a very proactive stand to say, let's be aware of the kind of racism that this kind of health scare can lead to, and that seems different from in the past to me.
Hey, Eva, I got about a minute left here. Can you tell us where should we expect this story to go? What's the narrative over the next week?
Well, China has been under such severe quarantine that it's really outside of China that is the most concerning. We've seen rapid expansions of the number of cases in, you know, Italy, Iran, and now the first case in Brazil, and especially there in countries that are less equipped to handle like a public epidemic.
That's right.
Yeah, it's really concerning.
Tomorrow's show,
also,
Eva, is about Idlib in Syria, and those massive refugee camps. What happens when it hits there? You know, maybe that'll come up in tomorrow's show. At this point, I've got to thank all of you, Eva, Dr. Lee, Janelle, everyone for being with us. Listen, this is just part of our coronavirus coverage. I'm going to tweet out right now a link to tons of other stories that Al Jazeera English has done on this. We can continue this conversation in YouTube and on Twitter, and I will see you next time.